Hi guys. I want to get on to creating some nice fun scenics, but that's not going to go very well if I'm trying to stick it all down onto flaky foam, so it needs a good hard shell. Before I can make a start on that, the layout needs a fascia on the front to tidy it up a bit. I'll make a start by removing the toggle brackets that hold the boards together. These will go back on when it's all finished and painted up later. Anyway, to make up the fascia, I'll use a plywood board that I forgot I had. I've bolted it to the front of the first Scenic board, and I'll start to measure up and mark the base of the actual baseboard, as this will show the lowest point that the Scenics can physically go. The next part is a bit cowboy, so bear with me. I need to trace the contour of the current scenery so it's somewhere near. To do this, I kept sneaking looks over the top of the board, then tracing what I could see onto the front. At the moment in this video, I can't actually see how effective this method is. So it'll be a nice surprise for both of us when we see it later on, if it goes well. Fast forward past cutting them out with a jigsaw because you don't need to keep seeing that. And I've brought up the piece to the layout. But before I attach it to the layout, I'm going to use the Dremel to sink the screw holes a little bit. This will result in the screw heads fitting slightly lower than the wood's face, so you won't see them when it's all done. I also wanted to tidy up the edge of the board where I'd cut it, and obviously sandpaper would have been grand, but I had the Dremel out, and I like to use it. It works, so that's great, even if it is spitting dust into my eyes. Another job that the Dremel's good at is levelling the tops of the two new fascia pieces. Sanding by hand would probably waste about 3 days of my life, whereas the Dremel is just gobbling it up. So looking at the completed boards, it turns out that my cowboy tactics paid off. Well done me. Okay, on to the main event. This is modelling compound. You would have seen me use this stuff in a Christmas build a few months back. This is essentially mashed up paper with a bit of plaster, and when mixed with water, makes for a very workable material to create a decent shell on the terrain. I'm a bit concerned how much of this stuff Nanguernal is going to use up, but I've got 2 bags at the ready. I'm not a fan of funny textures on my hands, but luckily this one just feels like paper mache, which I quite like. So I'm calm at this point, if you're wondering where my emotional state is. I'm applying this stuff bit by bit and work it into the polystyrene as much as I can so it doesn't just peel off when it's dried. This did come with one issue. My big bowl of mixture started drying much faster than I was expecting. So off camera, I'm dumping glasses of water into the mix just to keep it wet. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to try this stuff out. I've also started applying the mixture to the more fiddly areas, such as around the rock face, and then worked out onto the flat, less detailed areas. And then it's just a case of patting your way around the scene. I'm working right to left on the layout, and as the main area above is now covered, I'll move down onto the track level to build up a little bit of land in front of the rocks. I've gone along the top, and before I go the whole way to the incline, I need to actually form the area a bit, as I didn't have time to shape it the other week. I'm using the hot wire foam cutter to get this somewhere near what I want, and I must say I'm really enjoying working with this tool. And I pity the old me who did not have one. I need to make the base for the incline track display, that's now up at Nant Gwernel, and a rough shape has been made out of some scrap polystyrene. I'll use the hot glue gun to stick this down because a lot of glues will actually melt the foam. The next bit to focus on is where the steps will go in. I'm using a knife blade to cut away the slope. To be fair, I'm only doing it this way because I can't get the hot wire foam cutter in at this angle, otherwise I'd be using that. I'm going to model this area using a mix of filler plaster. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because I want to add the steps in and they'll be nicely set in filler. It's only this little area, the rest of it around it will be modelling compound again, and when all the scenery's down and finished you won't be able to see a difference between the two anyway. Well, while I've got a bit of filler mixed up, I might as well use it to fill in the countersunk holes from the screws. Being lower than the wood's face, when this will be sanded back and painted, you hopefully won't be able to tell where the screws are. Nice and neat. So I've made some basic steps out of plasticard, and I'll start to push them into the still wet filler. They may look really wide at the moment, because they are, but that's for a reason that I've planned into this build. I don't want the steps to be able to be knocked out easy or anything like that, so I'm going to use the filler to bed them in on the two ends. And you don't need to count, I do have the correct number of steps. Remember, I always have my reference photos open whilst I work. So in comes the modelling compound, and you can see how I'm blending it all into the filler, and bedding the steps in like I said I would. When it's all dry, those steps will not be going anywhere. It also gives the steps a nice aged look as the scenery builds up around them. You may also notice that the modelling compound has changed. That's because I ran through those two bags I mentioned and had to order a new one off Amazon to get the next day delivery. This one is sculptor mould. I've seen it being used by a lot of big modellers, but I didn't bank on how horrible this stuff would feel on my hands. At a couple of points I was dry heaving when I was working on this layout. It's actually disgusting. It feels like you're playing with cold porridge. In its defence, it does stick quite well though, and you can see how easy it is to fill the gap between the platform and the slate wall here. This here is the area that will one day become the stream. I'm not actually taking notice of it today because this is going to be quite a detail heavy area of the layout, so I'll concentrate on it as a separate piece later. This stuff will also hopefully act as a seal between the wood joints for the eventual resin pour. Flying over to the far right of the layout now, and there's no retaining wall, just a steep bank. It was actually quite difficult to sculpt this because the compound wanted to finish at a sharp angle on the edge of the trackboard, so a very gentle touch was needed to persuade it to a more gentle transition from ground to bank. Still really not loving the feel of it here. Right, so that's the whole layout covered with a coating of modelling compound. In fact, it really shows the divide between the two makes as well. I very much preferred the former grey tinted stuff that didn't make me feel sick by feeling like old ready-brack on my hands. The layout's in a bit of a mess though, so I'll quickly tart up the front. I'm currently borrowing a handheld sanding machine to work around the house, but it's actually come into its own for sanding back the filler holes for the screws. It also removes any modelling compound that's spilt over the edge of the boards, as I work the stuff right over the top of the wooden fascia to get a nice clean scenic break. Okay, well, I appreciate that this probably wasn't the most exciting video to watch this week, but in reality, the job of adding this compound has taken a good few days. If you're thinking it's a 10-minute job, it isn't. It's a good job done though, and the layout's now a massive step forward towards the scenic work. This stuff's brilliant to use though. It's really easy to form around any sublayer that you've used, and it only takes a day or two to fully dry. So the layout's ready to go by the next time you've got your modelling session booked. It does feel horrid on my hands though, and I think I'd definitely wear gloves next time if I was doing this particular brand again, just to stop the dry heaving. Well, I think I'm going to have a sit down and have a glass of water now. In fact, I think I'm going to have a bit of time off. No, not from the modelling videos, just from the layouts work, as I've got a few new models here to build that you don't even know have been released yet. So that's super fun, for me, and for you I guess. Dunno, depends what you like. Cheers.